introduce my colleague, Roberto Cotto. So Roberto, if you want to pop on and say hi, that would be great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Roberto Cotto, and I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm the Active Transportation Program Analyst. I do logistics, coordination, and administrative work, helping out Leanne. Welcome, everyone.
Roberto will be helping me keep an eye on the chat. You can ask questions there as well, and he will be letting folks into the meeting as they join a little bit late. So without further ado, I will share my screen and we'll get started. Again, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. We will have time at the end for questions and answers, and you are at the a webinar to learn more about how projects were selected for the most recent solicitation of Safe Routes to School grant funding. We're not even using Zoom on this. We're going to skip that slide altogether. We're using Teams. So hopefully folks are a little bit familiar with Teams. And we ask that folks keep themselves muted during the meeting, but when we're doing the Q&A, you can unmute yourself for any questions. And I wanted to say thank you all for joining us. We know it takes a lot of time to fill out an application when you're not sure if you're going to get funding or not, and that is capacity that is hard to give. So thank you for caring about safe routes to school and caring about addressing the barriers to students walking and biking in your community. And we really appreciate the time and effort you put into this program and in your applications. What we'll talk about today is the solicitation timeline, applicant analysis, the review process, our advisory committee input, and then we'll review and walk through the scoring of an application. So if you have the application that you submitted, you can pull that out and we can walk through it all together. I don't think this will take the hour and a half, so hopefully we'll get folks out a little bit early, but we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So this most recent competitive grant solicitation, all of the work happened kind of in 2022 for funds allocated in early 2023. So we had about a year of prep work where you all put in your time and effort into submitting your applications. We had we kind of started in February when our solicitation opened. We held some workshops. We had divided the application into two parts. Part 1 was due in March, part 2 was due in July. And part 1, the intention of part 1 was to gather enough information that you could kind of see how competitive your application would be in this cycle, and then decide if you want to put the additional work into part 2. So the idea behind that was to try to use your time really wisely and understand that having capacity to write a grant is actually really hard. So having more information is helpful. So we had about 83 applicants for part 1 requesting about $80 million. And then folks who ended up filling out the part 2 was about 56 applicants. In September and October, we scored applications and we did ground conditions review, and I'll go into what all of that means in the next slides. In November, the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee reviewed the applications and scoring and made a recommendation. That project list went to the Oregon Transportation Commission in January of 2023, about 2 weeks ago, I think, on Thursday. And then we're working now on getting the intergovernmental agreement signed and starting to build those projects. Here's some high-level analysis of the applicants. We had 83 applicants requesting about $80 million. And just so y'all know, these are all good projects. We see people applying for sidewalks and crossings, which are really important for students to be able to get to school. So they're all good projects. We have to prioritize them because we don't have the funding to fund all of them. So that's a high-level analysis. This is sort of where they're coming from. We use the ODOT regions as a way to kind of describe what parts of the state people are coming from. And so region 2, which is kind of the central valley out to the coast, has a lot of the applications because there's the most towns in region 2 and the most Title I schools in region 2. So Title I schools are low income schools. So this graph right here shows where all the applicants came from, and this chart down here shows kind of where all the low income schools are in Oregon. And so the graphs aren't that dissimilar. We're seeing that we're getting applications from where our low-income schools are. One thing to note about this round is we had a lot more applicants applying for the full $2 million. We usually don't have that many. And here's sort of a breakdown of who filled out part 1, who filled out part 2. This slide is very wordy. The overall thing that I want folks to know is that on the right side of the screen is showing some data points for all of the applicants that were submitted, and on the left side is showing some data points for all of the applications that were selected. And this slide will come up again at the end, but like who most applied, most applicants were cities. From ODOT's commitment to equity, about 84% of funding requests were for projects at low-income schools. For geographic balance, we had about 61% of funding requests were from areas outside of an MPO, so we know that rural areas were able to apply. And commitment to safety, about 91% of our funding requests had a project within a priority safety corridor, which is a road that has the characteristics of high crash risk characteristics. For this cycle, we're in fiscal year kind of 2023, 2024. And at the base, we have about $30 million for the Safe Routes to School program. And this comes from an annual allocation from the Keep Oregon Moving Act, which was created in 2017 by House Bill 2017, dedicating that there is $15 million off the top of an increase in gas tax that goes to Safe Routes to School every year. So we lump those two things, those 2 years together, and we have about $30 million of state funds for Safe Routes to School, not federal funds, of state funds for Safe Routes to School. In the rule, we have to take that $30 million and divide it into 3 different programs: the Competitive Grant Program, the Rapid Response Grant Program, and the Project Identification Program. The Competitive Grant Program is what you all applied for, so 87% of those funds, about $26 million, went to the Competitive Grant Program. Our Rapid Response Program is funding that we hold aside up to 10, we can spend up to 10% of that funds for projects that are urgent safety needs. So if there has been an injury or fatality of a pedestrian or a bicyclist, that funding can be used can be used to give to communities who apply for that rapid response fund. And then our project identification program is a service that we can provide planning assistance for communities. So a little bit more breakdown funds for 2023. The other thing that happened in 2022 was the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, passed at the federal level, which provided a little bit more funding for Safe Routes to School, but provided but that money was federal. We were able to do a couple of things that allowed us to access a little more state funding as part of that IIJA investment, and that we ended up looping into this round of funding, which ultimately made it to where we could spend $32 million on the competitive program this round. So a little bit more about the review process. So how do we get from all of the applications coming in, all of those 80 applications, to the final list? And what does that look like? In our decision tree for Safe Routes to School funding, we start where the funding becomes available. The Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee makes recommendations in consultation with the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee and the Oregon Bike and Ped Advisory Committee, which goes to the OTC, which then grantees are able to build. So we get all of our applications in to help get that funding out the door. We had 56 full applicants. Oh, Cassidy, that is a very good point. Hi, Cassidy. Oh, shoot, I just remembered. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen. That I did. Oh, wow, y'all are finding me on my this is like one of my hardest months ever working, and I think I did set this up as a Zoom meeting.
Hi, yeah, the invite said this is a Zoom meeting, not Teams specifically.
Oh my gosh.
I think folks are figuring it out, but I just wanted to put it on somebody's radar.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to keep going on the Teams meeting because I'm not quite sure how to fix this, and we're recording it. So I will apologize profusely later, and we'll keep going here. Yes, for the last 15 minutes. Okay, here's what we'll do. Can someone please on this call hop over? We'll pause for. We'll take a 3-minute break. We'll pause. Pop over to the Zoom meeting and let them know that that they can come over here, and I will apologize profusely. And we haven't gotten to the meaty part yet. Roberto, would you do me a oh shoot, I think I'm the one that has to do this. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, folks. Please come back at 10:20. I'm going to pop off. I'm gonna go to the other meeting, and we're gonna start again at 10:20, and I'm gonna bring folks over here.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. We're having some tech issues here.
Yep, no problem.
And for the folks who are currently joining us out of the Zoom meeting into this platform, if you can mute yourself, we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
This is working.
Hi, Donna. We'll get started in the next couple of minutes. We're just waiting for folks to join us here in this platform.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, trying one more time. My huge apologies, everyone. I know that your time is really precious, and this was not a good representation of me having all my stuff in order. I really, really apologize, and I don't know how else to apologize, but we'll keep it there. Thank you all for joining us over here. I'm going to jump into the presentation again. I think we've been recording this whole time, so it will be forever recorded that this is what I did, and my huge apologies. I ran through a couple of slides that were kind of high level slides, but we haven't got into any of the meat of the any real meat of the program yet. So I'll back up a couple and I will hop right in. All right, so my name's Leanne Ferguson, and I can't even tell you how sorry I am about this. And here we go. You're at the Safe Routes to School scoring webinar. We're talking about how we got from all of the applications to the final list. The decision tree that happens is that House Bill 2017 makes the funding available. The Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee reviews things and makes the recommendation, which goes to the OTC, the Oregon Transportation Commission, which approved the list about 2 weeks ago. And then we can start creating IGAs so that grantees can start building. So we had about 80 people submit a Part 1 for the Safe Routes to School application, and we had 56 submit Part 1 and Part 2. So the full application was 56 applicants. And what we did with those 56 applications was our first step was to use the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee approved scoring matrix. Plus we did an eligibility review. So that was our first step, and I can go through what those things look like. So the scoring matrix is something that is approved by the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. It focuses mostly on transportation disparities factors, and it so that's what we score most on, which is mostly income. The income level of the student at the school that you're building close to, or that you're applying to build close to. The next highest scoring points is from the crash risk factors, which is speed, lane crossing distance, lane width, average annual daily traffic, and history of crashes. School type also creates a lot of the points, which is we prioritize kindergarten through 8th grade or schools that serve that age group of students. in any combination. And then project readiness factors. So these projects must be built within 5 years. So we look at things like, do you own the right of way? Have you done some public process? Is your design completed? Things like that that help us see how ready the project is. Proximity is also something that we take into account on a small scale, like how close it is to the school. And for the eligibility review, we do a high-level review of, does the solution match the problem? So in the application, folks submit their problem statement and their solution, and we kind of see if those match up. We check the budget to make sure there's contingency in there and that the budget seems reasonable, and that it needs to be mainly a pedestrian and bicycle project, so a project that affects pedestrians and bicyclists. After we do that, we run the application through the scoring matrix and the eligibility review. We narrow it down to 150% list. And what that means is that we look and see how much money we have available. We look and see how much money folks are asking for. And then we do a review on all of the projects that, so if we have $32 million to allocate, we take that again by half. So another $15 million. And then, so we're basically looking at all of the projects under like $47 million, using that as a cut line. And that's what makes 150% list. Then for that list, we do a ground conditions review, and we work with our Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee to make some scenarios. So what the ground conditions review is where we do sort of another level of review with someone who kind of knows the area or could do a site visit on the area, or a desk scope where you look at Google Maps and see use that tool to see what it looks like. So staff completes either online assessments or in-person assessments of the area. We utilize our region staff to do that. So usually it's the active transportation liaisons. And then ODOT headquarters staff reviews anything that that ODOT was too much a part of making the application. After we do that ground conditions review, and we reach back out to applicants if there are any questions, and allow people to update their application if needed, then we look at some lenses that that the Safe Routes to School may apply. The Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee may apply over this list of projects. And these are written up in the guidelines, and the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee reviews these every cycle and makes tweaks to it. But these are generally the lenses. These are the lenses that they used for the last round, and potentially the lenses they'll use for this next round. But they like to see what if there's a lens of no applicant may receive more than $2 million. What if there's a lens of at the cut line, analyzing projects that are really close in score, right on that cut line, that so that we can prioritize new or persistent applicants. So new communities we haven't funded before, or applicants who have applicants who have applied over and over again and haven't been funded yet. So try to reward that persistence. If there are projects that score very similarly right by the cut line. And then the other lens that the advisory committee may use is that right at the cut line, if projects have a lot of similar scores, the advisory committee may go for several smaller projects versus one larger project. And this is all an attempt to like engage more communities in the Safe Routes to School program. So these are the lenses that staff uses when coming up with a couple of scenarios to provide for the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. So the scenarios that we provided, that staff provided to the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee, again, took all of those projects, all of like kind of in a list based on the ones who scored the highest. We found out where that cut line was for how much funding that we had. And scenario one, we looked at all projects up to $26.9 million. And this one had no lenses on it, and it did not include the additional funding that was made available through IIJA investments. And that what the result would have been to fund about 20 projects. Scenario 2 is where we were able to use that lens of funding several smaller projects right around the cut line versus one larger project. So the result of scenario 2 was that there were 22 projects on the list, and that we were able to get more right towards that cut line of the funding that we had available. And then the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee provided us with some feedback that they wanted to try to utilize some of those additional funds that were made available through IIJA. So we ended up providing a third scenario that added an additional $5 million. And then we were able to fund 26 projects out of the total 56 applications. So we've got these scenarios that we've given to the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. So in their November meeting, they got together and discussed the scenarios and made a recommendation to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So this is an example of scenario 2, which was ultimately not selected because the committee decided to add additional funds to the pot that were made available through IIJA. This is scenario 3, which was the list that was ultimately approved by the Oregon Transportation Commission. And this is yeah, these are the list of projects that were ultimately approved. The grayed out ones were the ones that were we were not able to fund because we did not. Those projects were unable to receive a smaller award amount, and so we didn't have enough money to fund them. We had to go to the next project on the list that had a lower request. So a little bit more about the advisory committee. This is our advisory committee composition. We've got folks kind of from all over the state representing the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties, some Oregon tribes, some MPO areas, health, Oregon Department of Education, a couple of key partners, Safe Routes to School practitioners, a couple of key partners all on the committee. And the goals for their meeting in November was to work together and agree upon that recommended project list for the OTC, Oregon Transportation Commission. When we provided them with the different scenarios, their homework assignment was to look at the projects and just see if they had any red flags about some particular locations, or if a project should be, if we should fund like location 1 and 2 in a project, but not 3, 4, and 5, and provide reasons for that. Also, if the lenses that they used got to the goals that they wanted to see in the project list. What they aren't able to consider is changing the score of a project. The scores are pretty built into the process, so there's not a lot of subjective scoring. It's all kind of adds up based on data. So the Safe Routes to School Advisory can't change the score of a project. And to see if they had any additional lenses that could apply to all applicants in the same way. So basically what came out of this is there weren't any red flags. There were no locations that the advisory committee wanted to pull out. Like I said, they were all really good applications. So no red flags. The majority of the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee supported scenario 2 during their homework, and then as part of that homework, hearing back from them that they really wish they could fund more projects, we were able to create the scenario 3 that allowed them to fund more projects. So we added that scenario 3 as part of this process, and ultimately the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee landed on scenario 3. And here again is a slide that I showed a little bit earlier to show that some data around all of our applicants sitting right next to some data around all of our new funded projects that are on that funded project list. And the majority of the funds in the selected list will go to cities, similar to who applied. Mostly cities applied. All funded projects are for students at Title I schools, so at our low-income schools. 63% of the funds will go to areas outside of an MPO, outside of a metropolitan planning organization. So that kind of shows that rural and urban areas were both able to compete in this process. And then commitment to safety, 87% of the funding request will go to a project within a priority safety corridor, which are corridors that have some of those high crash risk factors like high speeds, lots of crossing distance, so wide lanes, high average annual daily traffic, and or a history of crashes. So here again is that funded funded list. All of the green projects are on the list of projects that we sent to the Oregon Transportation Commission that was approved by the Safe Routes School Advisory Committee. So here's kind of the tier 2 of projects that were like pretty close, but we just did not have enough money to fund all the projects. And these are the ones we're kind of at the tier, not tier 23, this should say tier 3 at the lower end of the scoring scale, but still really needed projects, and we thank everybody for filling out their applications. Our final steps are that the OTC approved the list on January 12th. We're working on getting intergovernmental agreements out the doors and hoping that those will be signed in the next couple of months. We will have a report that we will produce by the end of February on this process. If you would like to have specific information about your specific application, you can send a request to me for your score breakdown. And we do have an appeal process. An applicant may email a letter to the division administrator, Karen Criswell, if you have an issue with our process. And the next grant opportunity will be in 2024 to allocate about $26 million in early 2025. And that rapid response program that is an ongoing program is available now for urgent need projects that, and an urgent need is defined by if a pedestrian or a bicyclist has been injured on a street within a 1 mile radius of a school, and you've got a quick project that you can put in that would make that area safer. We have a rapid response program that you can apply for to get funding quicker in between these grant solicitation cycles. So the last thing I want to do is to walk through an application and walk through the scoring. But I'm going to pause for a second because so discombobulating making this mistake and having y'all go to a Zoom meeting. So I want to pause for a second here and see if there are any questions about the overall process before I go through a sample. And while we're going through the sample, if you have your application with you, you can pull it out, and as we go through all the different sections that have the scores in it, it can help if you're going through yours at the same time. So, but I'm going to stop sharing just for a second to apologize one more time for my mix-up with the Zoom and see if there are any questions before we jump into the specifics of an application.
And Leanne, while folks are like developing a question in their head, there are 2 questions in the chat room. And one comes from Kathy. Nope, she just stated that she joined the correct room. Let's see here. Cassidy, in regards to solutions, is there a longevity expectations? Are quick builds eligible?
That's a really good question, Cassidy. It would probably depend on like the definition of that you're thinking of for quick build. I think the general take is that it'll be on the ground for about 7 years. So that's kind of what we'd be looking for.
And I found my second question here. Ryan asked, were applicants required to fill out a part 1 of the application prior to submitting part 2? Looks like 23 part 1s were submitted and 56 part 2s.
Yes. So 23 of the part 1 only was submitted. So everybody who submitted a full application submitted a part 1 and a part 2, but there were 23, I think, people who decided not to fill out a part 2. So they only filled out part 1, but the full applications were part 1 and part 2. Great questions.
Thank you, Leanne. I think that covers all the questions in the chat room. If folks have questions, you can raise your hand or just unmute.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And I'll share my screen again and we'll walk through the sample application. And I know it probably does not help the matter, but I definitely feel terrible about the Zoom thing. I'm trying to get over it so that I'm not so stammery during this presentation, but I'm like, Ferguson, you messed that one up. So here we go, review and scoring walkthrough. So I kind of pulled an application at random to walk through. So I'm going to be showing you this PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be pulling that application over and scrolling through it so that you can see where these things are located in the actual application. So again, the first review that we do is sort of an eligibility review. And what we do for this part is that if there are any eligibility questions, it's not like you get a lower score. We just reach out to you and we say like, hey, there's this ineligible piece. What can we do to remedy this? So there's a back and forth with the applicant to fix the problem and not, so eligibility is kind of a different thing than the score, where this is more of a back and forth. If there's a problem, we reach out to you and see if you can help mitigate that issue. So we're looking for, does the project address barriers to student walking or rolling to school? Does the scope and the project description, do they look doable? The applicant, we're sort of, during the application, we have some check boxes for, did you do these specific things? And if you check them, then those are things that are considered eligible. So sort of like, are you aligned with with a plan? Is this project aligned with a plan? So we look at those things. We conduct the ground conditions review, and if at any time an issue is identified, we bring it back to the applicant to discuss and try to mitigate. So for the specific application that I want to show you, so we're looking at the project description and the project, the problem and the description. We're also looking at, would the project primarily affect bicyclists and pedestrians? We're looking at the cost estimate and does it appear to be adequate? Does the cost estimate include a contingency? Does the project appear to be within the public road right-of-way? And does the project include excessive paving? So we're not supposed to use these funds to pave full roads, but there's a little paving that needs to happen generally if you're building sidewalk and curb and gutter. So we're looking for, is there excessive paving? So this is kind of like a reading of the whole application and just noting if there are any red flags. For the sample application that I'm looking at, there weren't any red flags, and this is really a scan of the entire application. And again, if there are red flags, this is when we call you up and we email you and we say, hey, we've identified something. Can you help mitigate that? A little bit more, does the problem and match the description? So this is sort of what the ground conditions review questions look like. And please identify any red flags. So this again is kind of an entire application scan. We heard from the sample project that everything kind of lined up, no red flags. So this and this is in general what happens. We don't have a whole lot of red flags, and if we do, again, we reach out to you to mitigate it. So so the sample, so the scoring of the application is automatically built into the form for most things. So on this chart, it shows what we were looking at, and this is the points that this application received for these things. So we were looking at like distance from the school, if it's a K-8 school, if it's a Title I school or a low income school. There are sort of some other demographic factors that we use. And those are all in part 1.3. So I'm going to pull over the application really quickly so that we can see. This is part 1. 1.2 is sort of some of our eligibility questions. 1.3 is some information about the primarily affected school. So we're looking at what grades are taught at this school. So this application said it's a school that teaches pre-kindergarten through 8th grade, so the applicant will receive 90 points. This next one is about the project's relationship to the school, so that kind of proximity percentage, that 3% of the points that are around proximity. And so you can select a couple of check boxes and you can receive a maximum amount of 15 points for this question. So this particular applicant checked that it is a quarter of a mile or closer to the school, so they got their 15 points kind of right off the bat, but they had a couple of other things as well that that they didn't go over the maximum 15, but like some applicants who didn't check this first box could get some version of the 15 points in some other way. So this applicant had a project really close to the school, and it's a project within the school attendance boundary. The next question is about what percentage of students are low income at the primarily affected school. So for this applicant, they received 80 points. They were within the 50 to 59% of students, of low income students at that school. But you can receive as many as 160 points for this question. And then we're looking for some other demographic information, and the applicant can receive up to 20 points in this section. And we're looking for if the school is above the average of ever English learners, if the school is above the state average of students of color, if the school is above the state average of students with disabilities, the school is above the state average of American Indian or Alaska Natives, and if the school is above the state average of chronically absent students. And what we know is that these demographics, what data shows us is that these demographics are generally transportation disadvantaged groups. And so we want to make sure that we are utilizing that data as part of our process. All right, so back to this chart. So I sort of pulled out all of the points that were received in that part 1.3. And then we'll move to part 1.4. Again, this is all automatically calculated as part of the application. So now we're looking at section 1.4. Actually, I'll walk you through it before I walk you through it there. So we're looking at section 1.4. We're looking for points around crashes in the area, how high the speed is, the average annual daily traffic, the crossing distance, and there's a transportation disadvantaged index, and a priority safety corridor points, all available in this section. So back to the application, we're in part 1.4. And we can scroll down past all the improvements that this is planning to do. And here's the first question about, is there a history of bicyclists or pedestrians or pedestrian injury or fatality? Kind of like a school-related injury or fatality. And if there is one in that area, if that area has a history of that, then you can receive up to 20, or you can receive 20 points. A little bit of definitions on what that is. The next section is about posted travel speed. So for this one, the applicant received 20 points because the speed was equal to or greater 40 miles per hour on the road. The next question is around travel lanes or crossing distance. And this applicant received 7 points for this because there were 3 lanes or greater than 30 feet of crossing distance. And again, these are those crash risk factors. So we're trying to get at what is the riskiest, what applicants have the riskiest locations. And then the average annual daily traffic, this applicant received 20 points for 6,000 to 8,999. And then ODOT created a transportation disadvantaged index that uses census data, and there's a map that that helps provide the information. But we're asking at the project location, what is the transportation disadvantaged index? And again, that uses census data to track a lot of data points. And this project didn't receive any points for the transportation disadvantage index. The final points that a applicant could get in this area is around the priority safety corridor. So taking all of that information above, if the project meets 2 or more of this list of criteria, then it is considered a priority safety corridor. And this is sort of laid out in the Safe Routes to School rule that that this is how we're identifying this, and this is a metric that we're using to help prioritize projects. So this application is considered in a priority safety corridor, so they received an extra 40 points. All right, so that is all of the stuff that is all auto-calculated within the part 1 of the application. When folks submitted their part 1, we were able to pull all of these numbers from everybody who submitted part 1, all of those 83 folks, and then we were able to give that information back to everyone to say, at a baseline, this is where your project scored, and this is where it lines up in the in as compared with everyone else who filled out a part 1, and sort of gave people additional information so that they could decide if they wanted to fill out part 2 or not, if they thought they would be competitive. Our recommendation is for everyone who fills out part 1 to fill out a part 2. Everyone's eligible. This is not an eligibility screen. It's more just like, so you know who else is going to apply and how you might stack up with that particular group of people. This is a copy and paste from our guidelines document, and it lays out exactly how all those points work. So I'll go through this kind of quickly. The guidelines are posted. I can send anyone a link to the guidelines, and they're also posted, but this is sort of what we give to people as part of their application prep so they can see how we are going to score their applications. And this is what it looks like, showing you how many points you can receive for any particular thing and how it all stacks up, and the OARs, the Oregon Administrative Rules that it's connected to. So that those are the pages that show everything that we've looked at so far. All right, so in the second part of the questions that we ask, there's a little bit of staff review that goes into these. So and these are all in part 2 of the application. So if you only filled out part 1, you wouldn't have gotten to any of this part. We look at right-of-way, we look at your public process, we look at the environmental risks of the location, we look at water. I called it water here. It's like drainage. utilities, and design. So these are all the things that help us gauge the risk of is something going to happen for this project that might hold it up enough that it won't be completed in 5 years. So I'm going to pop back over to our application. I'm going to continue scrolling through part 1 until we get to part 2, which is where the questions. Here's where part 2 starts. So we've got some background information. Here we go. So we're getting to the point where applicants provide us information that help with the scoring. So does the applicant own sufficient right-of-way? So in general, these are automatically scored in the application. We just do a quick eyeball on the descriptions. So does the applicant own sufficient right-of-way? In this instance, the applicant received 20 points. They do own sufficient right-of-way. Public process. In this instance, the applicant received 20 points. They checked the box, we have completed public process, or have done due diligence or are currently in the process. We do ask for some narratives on the process, so that's sort of the staff review that we do of this part, but in general, it's only red flags and then that the staff does during this part. So this applicant received 20 points for doing for being on top of their public process. These are some descriptive questions about public process. This next is looking for any environmental hazards or resources. The applicant said, no, there aren't any environmental hazards or resources within the project area. So the applicant receives 20 points if they don't need to address any additional hazards. So this applicant received 20 points for this question. Does your project impact stormwater drainage? They said yes to this one. So the staff review that we do on this is that applicants receive 7 points if they don't need to address stormwater or if they have a plan that will address the issue. 5 points if they know it's an issue but they haven't figured it out yet, or 0 points if they don't know. So I think the biggest thing to know about this section is to know in advance if you're going to need stormwater. So if you check I don't know here, that's kind of like the lowest score that you can get. Will any utilities need to be relocated? This is another one where depending on what you select and what you're doing, what your plan is to mitigate the risk affects what score you get during this portion. You can receive 7 points if there is no risk, 5 points if you kind of have it all that you know there's a risk and you haven't quite figured out all the details yet, or 0 points if you don't know. Here's where we let folks tell us how they've gotten so far in their design process. And that is all of the points for that section. So for this particular applicant, they received 73 points total for that part 2. And here again is the copy and paste from the guidelines that sort of details out how we determine the points for each section. The readiness section is sort of what we're focusing on there. What is the risk to the project? Utility, stormwater, environmental. And that leaves us, that is the full review of how we score and review the applications. I will stop sharing my screen at this point and see if there are any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand.
And Leanne, it looks like we do have a question. How is a school low income level rated? Looking at ODOT Safe Route to School map, some cities show all schools at 100% low income. And this question is from Ryan.
We use data provided by the Oregon Department of Education. They and then we put it into a map so that it's easily accessible. We used to use percentage of students who are available for free and reduced lunch, but since COVID-19 and the pandemic, all schools in Oregon are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So the Oregon Department of Education, which is great, but it was hard for us to like pivot to find another metric that would work to help us determine the income levels of schools. So the Oregon Department of Education shared with us a data set that they share with the federal government to designate which schools are Title I schools. Title I schools get additional services from the federal government. And it allowed the way they gathered that data was that principals submit the data to the Oregon Department of Education. They could use one of 3 different sources, and then that information all went to the Oregon Department of Education, and then they shared that data set with us. So so that's the description I have for the low income data.
Thank you, Leanne. And I think that's the last question in the chat room.
Because it's a little bit messy, especially since the rate of free and reduced lunch was not a data set that we could use anymore. We did allow for people, like, if the numbers that they're seeing on our map didn't seem right, if their principal gave them a different number, and they could provide proof that the principal actually this is our income data for our school. We didn't have anyone utilize that, but that was part of the application of, like, if you're talking to your school and they actually say, no, it's a different number, this is the number, then we allowed people to submit the number that the school provided them with backup. Any other questions about the application or the process? Well, I wanted to say thank you again for your flexibility. I cannot believe I did that. It's sort of like I set it up on Zoom because it's easier to share the Zoom recording. Like, everything about Zoom is easier, and then I just like completely forgot. So thank you all for your patience. You are much appreciated. And feel free to email me if you have any questions about the application. We will have a report. We'll have a report out by the end of February, which Roberto is helping me with. And
And
yeah.
there's one last question. Anthony, sorry for the last question. When will funding be made available?
If you are on the selected list, we are currently working with you on drafting your intergovernmental agreement. We should have those. So we've reached out to folks to try to get some preliminary information. We have all that information now. The next step in our process is sending that to the Department of Justice to kind of do a bulk review of all of the IGAs. And we should have those out to you in the next week or 2 for signature. As soon as the IGA is signed, we can set up the EA and the funding is sort of like released. And we have a training set up for new grantees on February 22nd. So a workshop for new grantees to go over the grantee guidelines and things like that. And I see the note from Kathy. If a project was not selected, can it be resubmitted? Yes, please do. We try to keep the application as similar as possible. So you should be able to kind of copy and paste and not recreate the wheel. Again, all of the projects are really important and we want to get to them all. And by you resubmitting is kind of how we'll ultimately do that. And that's played out. So this is the third round of Safe Routes to School grants that have been allocated. And we've seen some projects that have been applied for since the beginning got funded this round. So as we're meeting sort of like those highest need locations, we're able to move down the list, which aren't unneeded projects. They're just like compared to everyone else who applied that round, they just weren't the most needed project. So highly recommend resubmitting. Really good question, Kathy. And we've been trying to make tweaks to the program that make it easy as possible to resubmit. And I see Corey has a question. The February 22nd is a grantee orientation. So if your project was selected, we are inviting you to a grantee orientation on February 22nd. Any other questions? Looking back through the chat just to double check we got everything. All right, well, thank you all again for your time. Again, huge apologies for wasting 20 minutes of everybody's time. Yeah, Janelle, did you have anything? Nope, just came on. Hi, it's good to see you. Well, I think we can end this meeting a little bit early. So thank you all for your time. And again, thank you for submitting a Safe Routes to School application. We know it takes a lot of time, and so we want to support you as best we can in understanding how it's scored, really encouraging you to resubmit for the needed projects in your communities, and look forward to working with you all again in 2024 for the next round of Safe Routes to School grant applications. Really appreciate all of your time very, very much. Thank you all. Bye.